Well, we end up with good weather. The Swedes got an event, a random minor event that would have allowed them to move a stack in extra time, and they could still do that. Uh, that would allow them to move, say, two spaces without taking attrition, essentially. It was a captured orders type thing. It just allows you to surprise the enemy, but I don't think it really actually captures that idea, but it's kind of cool. There's all these little events. Some of them work better than others. I think that one doesn't match as well as I'd like. But there's nothing going on. Nobody's got a. The Russians chose not to go with a campaign, and the Swedes just have their defensive one. So over on the naval side, though, we have quite a bit going on. Swedes are heading up here. I don't remember if they have to go to Riga or Revel. I think they got to go to Riga and then back to Stralsund, and then they'll just score their point off that, and that's kind of cool. They're not really hoping to gain anything except working towards that extra point of prestige, which otherwise the Russians would get. This little sucker here is heading up for the show of force, which will be kind of an obnoxious thing for them to do to the Russians. That's a powerful fleet. Keeping my galley fleet ready to duck back into the port if it needs to. And the Russians are heading down on their little cruise down here. They may run into something. They can't divert from their mission though, so they've got to kind of watch what they're doing and what their opponent is doing. They might be able to catch them, but chances are they will not. But that's where we're going right now. Weather's good everywhere, whatever. The second impulse, the Russians and Swedes kind of collided here. The Russians decided they wanted to attack, so they did a search. They ended up finding the Swedes. They ended up with a wind gauge. It was actually a chance thing. We're at the end of the impulse, so these flip up. But the battle was fairly inconclusive. We had cautious leaders on both sides. They could each only command one squadron, and essentially with the same die roll being used, they just didn't do much damage to each other. The Russians had a slight advantage for having more ships here, but because they're using their ship of the line counter, which gave them an extra pip in the battle. That's all. Other than that, the Swedes are using a Soldi, a fourth raider counter. So now they're just going to pass by and do what each is doing. They have to continue on their missions. They just took some damage and didn't really matter. The Swedes and Russians, Swedes on their way back, and the Russians also just have to land at Revel, and they complete their mission. The other Swedish fleet over here, I started putting numbers on it, but they shouldn't have been there. Found out he didn't have his orders yet, so I put his orders in place. He got there quicker than I expected. Over here, the Russians chose to take their campaign. The Swedes almost took one. I was convinced that the Russians were just going to drag their feet and I wouldn't go, so I gave them a 50% chance of jumping in. They didn't. They held off. So the Russians are going to start things, and we'll see the game actually picking up speed again here. Of course, there's the danger of mud or wet still. There's always danger of some bad weather, right? But you can spend an operations point to avoid that. I forgot to make my roll for the Russian squadron, and it is forming a support convoy here, which means I have no way out. And I don't have a fleet. I did my repairs already. I'm gathering a fleet to try to bust its way out. But right now I have no way to really move out there and do naval support. So I guess I'll just sit on that for now. I don't want to launch galleys out into the main sea. They'd get hammered out there, and that would just be handing the Swedes some points. Maybe I can catch them with this show of force and hit them. I don't think I have a chance on the naval side. Anyway, next turn should be Alright, first impulse here in the May-June turn. And the Swedish fleet is here. Finally kind of interdicting Kronstadt. Not completely. It's not all the way in with a blockade. This is just their show of force, and they've actually succeeded in it. They can turn around and sail back. Russian fleet afraid to approach them, too weak. Out here, these guys were considering escorting, but they're waiting too weak. The other Swedish fleet, the weaker one's moving back this way. Russians are just afraid. But there's this galley fleet here, and I may send this out to go try to intercept that and cope with that. In fact, it should have a little galley flotilla marker on it so that I actually know what it is. Over here, the Russians are taking things kind of slowly. Now, they're taking their campaign, but they moved forward, not trying to accumulate attrition, and they're moving their other units forward as well to position themselves maybe for an attack in this direction, but also to help support this attack as best as they can. They're going to have to make a decision whether or not to cross up here and try to cut down or cross the river itself. There's some penalties to attacking across a river. They're not the obvious kind. It's more if you retreat, it causes problems and it can increase your surprise chance and everything like that. So it's a kind of interesting little puzzle there. Do you want to take the higher attrition by taking the extra move? Do you want to take time? What do you want to do? There are a lot of different options there. It's not really a clear-cut case. Onward. Russians are kind of wishing they had stayed holed up in Revel. They started chasing down this galley flotilla, and it's heading back down the coast. But the Swedes were able to run up right up against them. The reason... Oops. I'm in a strait there, so I take some casualties from that. The reason is really the move to the strait there. It slowed things down a little bit. There's a nice wind that both sides were sailing out away from St. Pete. This guy, he's having a little bit of trouble moving. These guys did not go forward, so I don't know what that means. Over here, the Russians march in, but they weren't able to coordinate their forces properly, and they did defeat the Swedes. This wasn't a great setup for them because the Swedes are beginning to get enough auxiliaries that they were able to counter most of the stuff. They had the advantage. The higher die here indicates a higher negative, which is in their favor. They had the advantage in terms of because they still have the cav superiority. They were beaten out with the artillery and this, that, and the other, and then they were outrolled. And the Swedes, the biggest thing was there were more Russians now. I was able to get more Russians into the battle. So the Swedes were pushed out, and that's going to cause a troubling situation because what the Russians have to do now is they have to move another unit in here and start a siege operation with that. Keep this as a covering force. Keep other guys to protect the supply line. It's going to take their whole army to keep the Swedes from being able to kind of bust this up. But it looks like the Russian siege is going to work because of that. And they also won another battle, which gets them another point of prestige, putting them back at the top again. They may want, I always forget to do this, to spend a prestige here and there, improve their ops points die roll, just because they're at the maximum already to keep things kind of better lubricated during this. All right. And things continue on the two maps in the direction they've been going. The Swede, well, this was actually kind of exciting. The Swedes caught the Russians here in this strait and ended up engaging them. Kind of brutal battle. The Russians lost one of their ships. The Swedes lost 2 ships of the line in the fight. But both admirals were injured. The Russian admiral is actually captured over here. And the Swedish, and this is their good guy, is dead. So they no longer have their best admiral that they can commit into battles. And that's kind of a pain in the ass because they got one guy who's still pretty good here. But now they're down to 1 out of 3 of their real flag admirals that they can count on to be able to handle battles, which means given that they're random draws, you never know, what you're going to get. You're getting a worse and worse chance of really being able to dominate the field. Then over here, the Swedes attacked first. Well, they attacked. They moved in, attacked the Russians, and were defeated. The Russians didn't have the field works this time. The Swedes got it. Nobody's surprised, but still Russian numbers told. They beat the Swedes off. They actually got a rout, and they managed to kill the Captain General again, which affects the prestige and the Swedes look like they're in a lot of trouble here. I moved an additional Russian unit up into place in order to take the blockade part. Well, actually, it's the other order. Yeah. In order to take over the siege. So the smaller unit will be doing the siege works, while the larger unit's going to provide a screen. And I've got other units coming forward to handle other stuff. I might be able to actually go up and grab this as well. So at this point, it looks like the Swedes may be chased off the map before the game ends. All right, well, we'll see, because we got a quarterly turn coming up. But there was something that drove a penalty on that. I'm trying to remember why. Oh, yeah, the Kronstadt expedition throws a -2 on the negotiations table for the next negotiations. And at this point, it could actually happen. So we have to kind of worry about that. That adds as a delay of game, essentially. All right. On the naval side of things, the Russians are preparing an escort, but this is a badly beaten up ship. It's really hard to keep everything in mind, and I make mistakes like that all the time. I assigned him to an escort role. He kind of needs to be, because I've got this other flotilla here, and these are all galley flotillas. So I'll just put that on the whole stack. I'm low on admirals. If I had sent out another fleet, I would have had to put a 0-point admiral in play, as far as I can tell. I don't know if I could use this sucker, because I would really like to get another admiral in play, and I think I can under these circumstances. So I may outfit a squadron here. I've got a big ship in play that I'd like to get out there. I really want to control the sea area there. Largely because when I calculated out the resistance value for the siege, it came to 11 because of the port access and the fact that there's an extra 5-point bonus to having a navy that can support the siege effort. This is just not going to fall anytime easily, and that becomes kind of a difficult thing. I only have 2 turns to crush it. Now, it's not going to fall through the normal surrender table, but it may fall through the siege activities. We'll see. Or it may get its value reduced. And this guy's heading up here on another campaign. I committed to another Russian campaign. I want to take as much as I can. I just, it's not a matter of trying to win the game at this point. It's a matter of, and I may actually be risking the game. It's a matter of trying to do what I think seems best, what fits the situation. I gotta look to see if this sucker can be called up into commanding a squadron. I think he can. I think that's why he has a little counter for him there. Let's see. Alright, before we actually get started, and I'm probably not going to have time this morning because I got a late start. A couple of notes came to me in my email from Ian about rules I had screwed up, and actually I kind of did it on purpose, I think. Not to get a response, but just I saw them and kind of modded things in progress without calling them out. I usually call them out, but I do it so much. You'll see, if you look at EU, I probably did it tons of times in that, and I'm doing it here too with these games where I feel like there's a lot more room for tinkering because I can see into them a lot more. So in this particular case, 2 things came up. And you have no idea how many I'm doing. I mean, I don't know. Because I read the rules and end up inserting stuff. Or deleting stuff that I don't like. So one of them had to do with these little captures I'm keeping here. And I don't actually have an answer from Ian yet, and I'll give it to you when I do. The rules very clearly imply that you capture counters. And I actually was doing that somewhere and then decided, wait, doesn't make sense because I've already got these piles. Basically, you capture the unit counters themselves. The thing is, it's not clear to me when you have the right to do that, because usually the player isn't losing unit counters. Usually what they're losing is these little things I'm keeping track of, these little steps of quality. Those steps of quality, though, don't really cost you to lose them. Losing a counter is a big deal. So I'm beginning to think, and I suspect this, when you take losses and your percentage indicates that you take a certain number of captures, that those are counters you're going to lose, and they're going to be off the board. And that would change things quite a bit. The Swedes would be in a lot of trouble if they had lost that many of their counters. They wouldn't be able to hold up and fight the way they have been. And the other issue that I wanted to touch on too, and I think I'm going to have to load this up rather than go into the next turn, but chances are the next turn won't be the last. The other issue had to do with the navies, where the Swedes were kind of worried that they were going to get iced in. So that's a really complex situation. The rules handle this fairly clearly. Apparently you can break into squadrons and do emergency landings all over the neutral ports. The problem with that is, in general, neutral ports didn't really like taking in military units and allowing them, to use their ports in the midst of a war. In this period between the laws of warfare were just being set in this period, so I can't be absolutely certain. But I think by 1740s, you have a pretty clear concept of the internment of troops and denying access to war, things that would aid the war for another between two powers. That doesn't really break down until World War I, where, for whatever reason, it just severely breaks down. You have it. In the American Civil War, for example, you have the English accused of aiding a belligerent. But it's at a minor scale compared to what happens later. Anyway, usually countries in the 19th century would be very, very reluctant to provide any kind of aid to a military combatant that they're not directly involved with. And then I believe that goes back at least in a vestigial form to, say, the Peace of Westphalia era. I don't know whether it stretches further than that, and I don't know how rigorous it was at this particular point, but I suspect it was pretty heavy. So that would essentially be, hey, the Swedes aren't going to be, their ships aren't going to be available unless Denmark enters the war on their side, which is unlikely. Anyway, a little bit of babbling for no good reason, but I wanted to clarify those points. Ian will probably be getting back to me about how those prisoners of war are supposed to be handled. He's been very good about this now. I suspect he's going to come back with, the counters are captured, and it's up to the person losing the counters to provide them. They can provide them at any quality level they like, but it's the whole, the other option would be only if the only if the person losing the prisoners lost a unit would they even be eligible for this prisoner of war thing, and that would have almost no effect because almost nothing ever gets lost. We've had, here's a handful of Russians that were lost. We had a pile of Swedes that were lost at one point when they were doing very poorly. All right, up it goes, I guess.